So, the Redmi Note smartphones have been some of the greatest value budget smartphones of all time, and the Redmi Note 5 is going to be no exception. In this video I'm going to tell you everything you need to know about the phone, and for $200 it's going to blow your socks off. With that being said, let's get started. So the first improvement, and this is genuinely groundbreaking, is that the Redmi Note 5 will use either a Snapdragon 630 or a Snapdragon 660. Now these are basically 14nm chips, as opposed to 28nm from the last generation. And what that effectively means is they are far more efficient and way faster. The CPU can be up to 50% faster than that found on the Redmi Note 4, and the GPU up to 30% faster. And what that also means is we now have an X12 LTE modem, effectively giving us download speeds of 600 megabytes per second. So that's not quite reaching the upper echelons of the Snapdragon 835, which can do a gigabyte per second, but nonetheless, compared to the last generation, again, huge improvement. And so even more importantly for some people, this processor change allows the introduction of Qualcomm's Quick Charge 4.0. And this is a generational leap. It is the next step in front of Qualcomm's Quick Charge 3.0. So the Redmi Note 5 will ditch the micro USB port in favor of a USB Type-C port, and that has full compatibility with this Qualcomm Quick Charge 4.0. Now it is quite unusual for one particular smartphone model to actually have two different chips inside of it depending on which model you get, but the reason they've been able to do this is because the Snapdragon 660 and the 630 have been made to be interchangeable. They fit in exactly the same smartphone socket, and so it's not going to make the production process any longer. And traditionally what Xiami has done with the Redmi Note phones is released a standard model and a little bit down the line a Pro version. And so my prediction is that we're going to have the standard model with a Snapdragon 630 and 3GB of RAM, and then the Snapdragon 660 and 4GB in the Pro version. Either way, it's going to be very powerful. So as well as being known for their hugely powerful components for the price, the Redmi Note phones also have had fantastic battery lives, and the Redmi Note 4 was no exception with a 4100 mAh capacity. Now, from the leaked slides from the Redmi Note 5 presentation, we're seeing a 3790 mAh capacity, which is less. And before that alarms you, essentially it's going to have the same battery life as the Redmi Note 4. The components are more efficient, but cutting down the battery slightly allows them to make it slimmer. And the bulk of this phone was one of the few factors that really let it down a little bit. So another really exciting thing about the Redmi Note 5 is the fact that they have made dramatic improvements on the camera front. And I mean, the Redmi Note 4 was no slouch. Considering a $200 price point, it was actually punching well above its weight. But the Redmi Note 5 absolutely blitzes it. We're going to swap out the 13 megapixel rear and the 5 megapixel front for a 16 megapixel Sony rear camera and a 13 megapixel front camera. And speaking of the camera, this brings us back to the processors inside. These new generation Snapdragon chips mean that even the mid-range processors can allow for 4K video recording. So whereas the Redmi Note 4 was very capable and it could do some decent 1080p footage, being able to shoot good 4K video on even a mid-range $200 smartphone is going to be amazing. So that's all well and good. I mean, for the most part that's pretty amazing, but unfortunately there are some things about the Redmi Note 5 which haven't changed since the Redmi Note 4, or even the Redmi Note 3 before it. Namely the design. So there are some subtle changes. For example, the front 3 capacitive keys have been replaced by a single one, and more than likely this is going to have the fingerprint scanner built into it, and that one key is going to be able to combine the functionality of the other 3, and that's great. But unfortunately, just looking at the front of this new smartphone, it doesn't feel revolutionary. It feels like a very solid step in the right direction from an already powerful smartphone, which was great value for money. But when I recently unboxed a smartphone like the Doogee Mix, it made me realize that actually the competition for budget smartphones this year is really picking up. I mean, for a similar price point, you were getting a completely bezel-less smartphone which had 6GB of RAM and one of the better octa-core processors. So yeah, I mean, Xiaomi clearly has a lot of work to do. But at the same time, we can kind of see where they're coming from. I mean, if Xiaomi released a phone that looked like the Doogee Mix for this price point, it would be sabotaging its own sales. Doogee is a company that, for example, doesn't really sell any higher end flagships than the mid-tier ones like the Doogee Mix, and so it has nothing to lose. Whereas if Xiaomi produced something similar, it's going to be so impressive, so eye-catching, that the average consumer is going to pick that over its potentially more expensive, more visually appealing handsets. So guys, that is the Xiaomi Redmi Note 5. I'm super excited for the phone, and I hope you are too. And more than likely, we're going to be one of the first channels to get hold of it, so watch out for the review. And with that being said, I'm Mr. Who's the Boss, and I'm signing out.